everyone, and welcome back to our MOA Live Talk series. Once again, I'm Dr. Heather Hatch, and I'm here today at the museum in our Sustainable Collections repository. So this is where a lot of my work is done, and where a lot of my work is for, really, since I'm the collections manager here at the museum. So I want to give you a little bit of background on this building and about the repository itself, and then I'm going to show you some of the features that I can. We've had some feedback about, that maybe wandering around with a camera phone is maybe not the most, it's difficult for people to follow along. It gives you a little bit of vertigo, so I'm not unfortunately able to take you through a walking tour since we don't have a good stable camera that really allows that, but I'll try to show you as much as I can from where I'm at. So right now I'm standing in front of the doors of the repository, facing towards the shelving. So I'm going to turn around and show that to you in a moment or two, but just to give you a little bit of background about what this building is, how it came to be in the control of the museum, and some of the names you might have heard associated with it. So this was actually constructed as a project out of a partnership with Western University and McMaster University back in around 2012. This was headed by Dr. Neil Ferris, who's our Lawson Chair of Archaeology here, and Dr. Aubrey Cannon, at McMaster University. They came together to form a project that was called Sustainable Archaeology, and is still called Sustainable Archaeology. And the idea here was because Neil especially had experience working in government. He had worked for the Ministry of, I'm not sure what it was called at the time, the Ministry of Culture essentially, which is today the Ministry of Heritage, Tourism, Sport, and Culture Industries. But he worked for them for a long time. And he sort of saw a lot of the changes that were happening in archaeology as CRM started to become more and more important, as some of the legislation we've talked about in the past came into enforcement, where people who were interested in doing development in Ontario were now actually having to hire licensed archaeologists to conduct assessments and archaeological work in the field. And this was starting to incur quite a lot of archaeological material. So stuff was coming out of the ground. And in the license that people have, there is a responsibility to take care of those collections once they're out of the ground. Now, this is something that the individual licensees, so people who work for a particular company, take on personally. So it's not something that's given out to a company or to an institution. It belongs to, that responsibility of the license falls on an individual. And as you can imagine, this long-term view of collections care can extend quite beyond the life of an individual or the life of an institution, for example, even. So we were running into, or what Neil started to see, was instances where archaeologists are starting to get older, smaller companies especially were starting to fold, and so then the question arose of what's going to happen to all of this material in the long term. Well, one of the things that the license says is that individual licensees can pass along the responsibility of collections care to a public institution. And then that institution would be responsible for the care of those collections in perpetuity, in trust, for the people of Ontario. So it's not a matter of giving this stuff to a museum and then the museum owns it. The museum is then obligated, or whichever public institution you're talking about, is obligated to care for those materials in trust for the people of Ontario. So it's not a matter of ownership, it's a matter of basically taking care of that stuff for the people of the present and the people of the future as well. So Neil saw all this stuff happening. He coordinated with Aubrey to create this project with the idea of providing a place where this stuff could be stored physically, and also being able to provide access to it in the present and then in a long-term view as well. So the idea was basically to facilitate care and access, right? So there were these two repositories that were built. One of them was built here on the grounds of the museum, and that was partly because of our partnership with the university, and also because Neil is cross-appointed between University of Western Ontario and with the museum being our Lawson Chair of Canadian Archaeology. So it made sense, since we had the physical space to erect a new repository, that it would be built on these grounds. However, it was still at that point managed by or through the university, essentially, under Neil and Aubrey's grant. There's also another facility that was built at McMaster that's still called Sustainable Archaeology McMaster. So they were partner institutions. They both had these repositories built with the idea of long-term care. Part of the vision of this when it was being constructed was that the idea that the museum itself would eventually step into a role of taking over care of this responsibility. So sustainable archaeology has a lot more elements to it than just having these repositories and just sort of promoting access. There's also a vision of what sustainable archaeology as a practice meant. And part of that was the idea that archaeologists shouldn't be the only ones who have a say in what happens to all this material culture. So along with that came the idea of having a committee or an advisory group that would be half archaeologists and half First Nations community members or community representatives who could discuss some of the issues about curating, caring for, and accessing all these different kinds of questions that arrive around archaeological collections. So that group, which is called the Sustainable Archaeology Advisory Committee, still exists. And they still provide some ideas. They still work on some of these sort of conceptual materials, and they provide advice to the museum's board about policies that the museum should be implementing around the care of these collections. So sustainable archaeology continues to play a role. However, the actual physical repository and all of the assets from it, including the collections, were actually transferred to the museum by the University of Western Ontario at the end of 2018. I had to check myself on the dates for a moment. So since that point, this is no longer the Sustainable Archaeology London or Sustainable Archaeology Western repository. It now belongs to and is operated by completely the Museum of Ontario Archaeology. So we refer to it as our Sustainable Collections Repository as a nod to that sort of vision of sort of helping to promote this vision of what a sustainable archaeology practice should be, because that is something that we still think is important and that we, ideals even that we ascribe to. So we still want to continue to sort of push forward the vision that Neil had for this place. And as I said, it was always sort of envisioned that we would take over this management or operational role for this particular facility. And so we have stepped into doing that. And sort of that's where we are now. So you might hear this place referred to occasionally still as sustainable archaeology. It's a name that was around for a good long time in any case. And so it's really sort of stuck in people's heads. We even still sometimes call it sustainable archaeology. It's still on some of the signage that's outside. But really, when we're talking about this space now, we're talking about the research spaces associated with the equipment and so forth. What we're really talking about now is it's all the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, and this particular space here is now our Sustainable Collections Repository. So hopefully that's not too confusing for people who don't have any background on all of this. But the important point here to take away is that we took over this facility that provides us with the opportunity to care for a massive amount of Ontario's archaeological heritage for the long term. And that's what our commitment is, that we want to be a place where this material can come and be stored in a long term, invested in as a public institution. We have a lifespan and a longevity that extends beyond, certainly beyond individuals, certainly beyond some of the companies that have been founded in archaeology in Ontario, and hopefully into the long, long future as well. So we're hoping that we can be a place where this stuff can come and be cared for properly for the duration, in trust for the people of Ontario. So with that said, I am going to spin me around, I guess, and give you a sense of sort of the scope of the building that we're in right now. So this is, it is physically part of the museum now. There's sort of, I guess there's like an internal wall separation, but it is essentially part of the same facility. But this repository side, is really quite large. And I'm not sure how much of that scale is going to come across on the camera, but hopefully you'll get some sense of it. So I'm just going to turn, you can see upstairs too. So we actually do have some space above that is used for research that we're not going to get to see today, unfortunately. So all right, I'm going to spin you carefully. You're going to see some of our equipment here in the background. We've got some racks here for our flotation machine. You've got our loading bay doors back here. Yes, Pauline is saying that she's always wondered what was behind these doors. This is sort of the idea, was to give you guys a chance to see sort of into this space, which we can't visit physically at the moment. So you can see there's quite a lot of rack space back here. And it keeps going and going and going all the way down there. So this is probably a good sense of the scope of the size of this place. So there's actually, you can see these sort of individual racks. If I go back this way, yeah, so you can see these like individual rows here. There is 22 of those different rows, and then each of those has 16 shelves high. So all in all, we have the space for about 54,000 boxes of archaeological collections here. It's quite a lot. You can see there's a lot of green you're seeing on the shelves lower down. We've also got a lot of empty space up top still. And again, the idea is that this is going to be a long-term project. So we're not expecting to fill it up all immediately. We have started bringing in some quite large collections. We did inherit some as well when we took over the collection from the university and from the Sustainable Archaeology Project, but we do still have quite a lot of space to fill. I think the last time I counted, we have a little over 8,000 boxes of material currently. It might be a little bit more right now. So I'm going to show you sort of how our shelves look a little bit more closely. I'm going to get them to open. So you can see sort of here in the background, we've got these panels here. And that's how we use to open the shelves. So they're pretty closed right now, but I can press these buttons. Oh, I'm going to close this one. Oh, come on. And then they'll start to move. So when this place was designed, it was like we really put a lot of thought, and I say we, I wasn't here at the time, it was mostly Rhonda Bathurst, who is now, or Dr. Rhonda Bathurst, who is the executive director of the museum currently, who did a lot of the design and thinking through of what this place should look like, as she was the operations manager for this facility at the time. So there was a lot of thought put into how do we maximize the amount of space that we have here on hand. So you can see they move nicely open on their own. I'm actually going to see if I can open the one behind me to give you a little bit more of a sense of how deep, far back they go. And so I'm not sure if you've been to the museum before, and if I'm just going to turn back here for a minute and show you back down that way. But just off here to my left, and again, everything is sort of mirrored for you, so I guess it's off to your left as well. Maybe. Anyway, off this direction, in any case, is the front of the museum, and then, is that right? Yes. And so we've got Medway Valley sort of back behind us here on the other side, and then we've got also sort of creek area back behind us as well. So we sort of were curtailed in the size of the space that we could have based on the fact that we are brushing up against an environmentally sensitive area. So they really took that floor planning into very close consideration when they were building this place. So the racks, the height of this place is basically as high as we were allowed to go without requiring special training and equipment in order to get up to those higher racks. So we actually do have like a small wave vehicle, like a lift machine that helps us get up there, but it's, you know, basically we set the height of the tallest shelves so that we wouldn't need to say like get special training harnesses, like training to use harnesses and all that sort of stuff in order to get up to those high shelves safely. You can also see how far back it goes back down here. And again, that was the idea here was that we wanted to make it as large as we could without impacting that area. So it goes all the way back down to those to that wall. There's a little bit of space where you can't actually turn that machine around that we need to go up to the high shelves. You actually have to go in a big loop pattern around the repository because we were so committed to having that space for holding collections that we thought it would be worth it to sacrifice what would be needed to like actually turn that machine around down there. So you have to go all the way around. It's kind of a fun driving adventure, let me tell you, because the other thing is that it's the width of the shelves here is actually just wide enough for that machine to get down. So you have to drive very carefully straight all the way down if you're trying to get up to anywhere in those higher levels. So I'm not sure if you can, I'm just going to scoot back a little bit here so we can see into the shelves a little bit. So just bear with me for a moment. So there's a couple of features here that I want to talk about in the shelves themselves. So I said that we have 22 columns, so they're numbered, they're actually lettered, and then the shelves, each shelf level is, I gotta think these through for a minute. So each shelf bank, all the way down, is lettered, and it starts over in the far wall and goes from A all the way over to V in the other side. And then within that, each of these columns here, each of these columns up is numbered. So we're standing right here in front of H is this bank all the way down is H, and then here we're standing in front of HO1. Beside it is HO2, 3, 4, all the way down to H22. So quite a lot of space. And then on each shelf, or each space, we have different shelf spaces. And there's one in the front and one in the back. So these front shelves here can hold 6 boxes, and the next ones and the ones in the middle can all hold 8. So there's 8 boxes on this shelf here, which is HO2. DO5, because they're numbered up from the bottom as well. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is that we have a lot of space, but also each of those spaces has its own unique name. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm just going to bring, again, us a little closer. And then turn this over here. It's going to be backwards for you anyway, but you can see our shelf labels here. We've got these codes on them that are unique codes that give the address of each of these shelf spaces. So that's how we keep track in this huge repository of where our boxes are, so where the material is. So I've also got some other things to show you. Yes, very organized. Well, with that many spaces, we really need to be. It's very important for us to be able to find things in here. I mean, we're not, as much as I like to sort of, when people are here in person, to sort of give them that sort of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, look at all this like space for like stuff that we have for materials. It can be, I mean, it's cool to see on the video, but in person it's even much more impressive, I find. But unlike them, we want to be able to find our collections again later. We're not just planning to put them on a shelf and never be looked at again. So we want people to be able to, like I said, need to be able to find them for researchers, for use in our own exhibits, sometimes for different descendant communities want to have access to this material for different reasons. We want to make sure that that's possible. So we are also making an attempt to digitize a lot of this material as much as possible so that we can put it online so that people don't actually have to physically come here in order to access it. But we recognize that physical access is important still for a lot of different reasons. We need to be able to accommodate that as well. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the materials that we have and that we use here. So again, this is a space that's designed for long-term care. So we want things in here to be able to be safe and stable for as long as possible. So as much as we want to be able to provide access, we have to understand also that not everything is going to is going to need that kind of interaction. So we have a lot of archaeological materials here that are sort of like bulk materials, and I think I've talked about this in the past, about how when you're looking at an archaeological collection, it's not necessarily the individual pieces that have value, there's that collection as a whole. But there's going to be elements of that collection that are not necessarily the sort of thing that once they've been recorded, once they've been photographed and investigated and like those records are available, that people are necessarily going to want to look at again. So for example, we have one site where we have about, I think, at least 20 boxes of fire-cracked rock. So this is rock that was collected from the site, and it's an older excavation, so it's not necessarily the sort of practice that people would do in the field today. But they collected all of this fire-cracked rock. So this is rock that was impacted by fire, so maybe it was around herds and whatnot. It was recorded in the field, and then it was actually collected. And they're just basically burned rocks. And certainly there are people who study fire-cracked rock, and it's possible that somebody would be like, oh my gosh, you have how much from this one site? Please let me come look at it. And that would be great. But it's not the sort of thing that's commonly accessed. It's not the sort of thing that we're probably going to make a huge, like, priority in terms of what we're putting online. It's very unlikely that it's going to find its way into a museum exhibit, although anything is possible. There's so many different stories that we can tell here. I'm not going to rule anything out. I'm just going to say probably not very likely that anyone is going to want to come and look at these, 15 to 20 boxes of rocks. So they're probably going to stay on these shelves. We want to make sure that they're safe, that the materials that they're in are also going to be okay for as long as possible. So one of the things I talk about when I bring people here in person is that we use a lot of plastic here. And in our personal lives, in a lot of contexts, there's this push to minimize how much plastic we're using, which makes sense. We have all these what we call single-use plastics and straws and Ziploc bags and all that sort of stuff that we're trying to cut down on the amount of waste that we produce. But here, we really want plastic duration, right? So we talk about how it doesn't break down, how it lasts in the environment for a long time. Those are all things that are actually appealing to us. And so we use a lot of essentially our archival grade plastics. So we know that they're not going to create problems. They're not going to turn into they're not going to get goopy and sticky the longer they sit over time, the way some older kinds of plastics do. They're going to be relatively stable. They're not going to start to break down and produce gases that can impact human health or impact the safety of the artifacts over time. They're stable. They're not, excuse me, especially in the kind of environment where we're keeping them here in the repository, they're not going to break down. They also have another advantage to us, which is that they don't attract pests. So in the past, and currently, a lot of museum collections and archaeological collections are stored in cardboard, And you might be able to see if I turn down the other way, back towards the doors. We actually have a lot of collections that are currently in cardboard, and these are collections that we are currently repackaging to meet our standards. So they've come to us from different CRM company, in this case it's from one particular CRM company, and they actually contracted us to repackage the materials into the standard of care that we require here for our objects. So we've kind of got a transition from cardboard to sort of an intermediary stage where the exterior packaging might be okay, so they're into the green boxes, which are actually sized again specifically for our shelving, so they're not quite the same size as a standard banker's box, but they're a little bit smaller. Again, they're designed to fit exactly on the shelving that we have. And then as things get further into the repository, generally speaking, that's sort of how we progress things, from just come in, intermediary stages, and then sort of a final package where everything's all complete. The exterior box has been replaced, and the interior repackaging has been done, and then it eventually will get a label also that will help us track it as well. So, where was I going with this? Yes, so we've got the cardboard. We try to eliminate that because cardboard and paper and these sorts of materials are actually very delicious to insects and to rodents as well. So we're hoping, and we have been successful so far, I should reinforce, in cutting down the potential of there being any contamination in these collections by using these archival plastic materials. And what we're talking about here, the boxes that we use are a blend of polyethylene and polypropylene, and then the boxes or the bags that we use inside are polyethylene as well, and so they're archival grade materials, and they're not as attractive to pests. They're also not as susceptible to water damage either. So there's these different mitigating factors that we're trying to enact. Wait, I got that backwards. We're trying to mitigate some of these potential issues that can come up in collections care by using this particular packaging that, again, we're hoping will last us over the long term. And I do have, just off to the other side here, I keep moving around a little bit. I did bring over, so these are our bags. They're not very exciting. They look like Ziplocs. They do use that same zippered self-closing technology. We actually get them, we're very lucky. There's a local company that is able to produce these for us. So shop local. But we're picky about what we use. So we don't want to use just sort of bags that we bought just off the shelf. We want to make sure that they are able to provide us with the specs for these materials to say, like, yes, this is clean plastic, it's not recycled, it's not using other materials that might be in there. We know it's going to be stable. As for the boxes, I'll show you those as well. So these are our green box. It's very exciting, I know. That's what they look like on the inside. They are corrugated. Like I said, they're a corrugated plastic. They're a blend of polyethylene and polypropylene. And we've also, like I said, done our research to understand how this material is going to last over the long term. We also consulted when we were constructing this place and getting set up for it. Again, I say we, but I was not physically here at the time. But they consulted with the Canadian Conservation Institute as well about whether or not this material would be appropriate, and they, at the time, did say, yes, that looks great. So this is basically what we have that we know will last the longest and stay stable for the longest stretch of time. So that's why we're using this. I'm going to try and show you sort of more what one of our finished boxes looks like also. Got a couple of props off to the side here. See how it goes. So this is one of our finished boxes. You can see that like the shelves, it's got this code on it. And then it's got this long string of numbers. This long string of numbers is actually the unique identifier for this exact box. So there's no other box that's going to have this really long number. And then this code is really just, it's not a QR code. It looks very similar. It's actually a DM code, data matrix. And it's basically, it's like a double-sided barcode. So imagine like this side and this side all read the same, and then you just sort of get like a grid based on where the different parts of them meet. And so this can be scanned, and the shelves can be scanned as well. And so then we recorded in our database that this box is in a specific shelf location. And so that's sort of how our system works. We're actually really lucky. We had somebody here who worked on our database with us and worked on programming when it was still Sustainable Archaeology, and he actually created a phone app for us to be able to do all this. So I can use this phone. So we actually bought special phones just for use in the repository so that we're not asking people to download apps onto their phone for work. We don't have to worry about, oh, do they have an iPhone? Do they have an Android? We've got all that sort of standardized. And I've got this app, again, it's going to be backwards to you. So I can just click on this field, and then I've actually got a barcode scanning app on my phone. So I can use that, and you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing. But just trust me, I can scan it, just hold it up to the number, and then it's got that whole number filled in, and it's got some basic information about that box. And then it says, scan shelf to place box. So I can just, I'm just going to turn you back this way. And I can take this box, I'll put it in one that you can see, even though it's going to be a little high. Maybe not. That's too high. I can't reach. Put it here and bring you back this way. So I have now set this box on this shelf. The next step here is I can click on this little field, again hit my scanner, and I can say, okay, it's in the front, so I've got to make sure I'm scanning the front one. Hold it down here, scan that thing, and then it's got the shelf location. And that's been updated in our database as soon as I've done that. So now our database knows that this box, 972389, blah, 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 whatever, is now on shelf space H01 D01. So that has been recorded. If I need to find that box, I can go to my database, put in its number, put in some other identifying information about the box. It will tell me where to go to come find it. So it's actually a pretty convenient system. I love it. It makes my life very easy to be able to find things in this way. So that's sort of like how the logistics work, sort of the whys behind the repository. There's a few other things in here that I think are really cool that I might be able to show you. Unfortunately, as I said, I can't really physically take you upstairs. I don't think anybody would really enjoy the sort of bumpy ride of me going up the stairs. But there's some things that we have here that I think that are also kind of neat. Just talking about the shelf space, talking about things other than the shelf space. So if I go back, I might be able to point, you can see one of the things that you have here is this stack of cardboard. And that, as I said, we have this ongoing repackaging project from materials that came in from one of the CRM companies in the province. And so we sort of get to a point where we are placing that stuff into our own packaging, and then we have all this other stuff that needs to go out. So we've been doing a combination of recycling and then sort of like putting these boxes up for free on Kijiji to try and get them a new use. Unfortunately, with everything being shut down, they're sort of just taking up space in here. Eventually, I broke down some of them earlier today. You might be able to see some big stacks of them on some of the carts back there. And eventually they will get, unfortunately, recycled at this time. It's not really the best timing for people to come in and out of our space that we don't know, just to pick up some boxes. So that's kind of where we are with that. But you can see we've got some cabinets around here. So there's this big gray one in the background. There's a little red one here as well. And so these also provide us some additional storage space for materials that we might not want to just keep in with the regular collection. So this is stuff that has like either a monetary value or a cultural value that's particularly high, and sometimes things that just don't fit in our boxes. So one of the drawbacks to having this really great system is that not everything does fit in one of those boxes, and so we have to find some alternate storage for some of the materials that are found. Most of archaeology is small broken pieces, but sometimes we're lucky and we find big pieces, and we're like, what do we do with that? But we are making accommodations with that. You can see a little bit above here as well, back in the background. Sorry, I'm getting all disoriented on the camera. So again, you can see that sort of works, the storage space up top. That is really where we do a lot of the collections repackaging projects, for example, all take place up there. We've got 3D scanners in there. I'm hoping to come back in another day and show you a demo of some of our scanners. So again, that comes back down to this access question. So in terms of being able to provide digital access, we have photographs. We also have 3D scans that we're looking at providing for some of the artifacts as well. I think some of the artifact spotlights that we put up in the past, we've had 3D scans to go along with, and we're hoping to provide more of that sort of thing in the future as well. So what else do I want to say about anything back here? It's a very in-use space. It's an active space. A lot of people work in here. We have a lot of volunteers who come and help us with the different repackaging projects that we have. So there's one that we're doing with a contract. We also have materials that we did that are sort of in a different stage where we repackage the interior, or sort of repackage the boxes and are working on that material. So there's different projects. Once we're open again, if that's the sort of thing you might be of interest to you in terms of volunteering, we do love to have people who can come in and help us with that. There is a lot of work to do on the collections. Everything in here is tracked, like all those processes are tracked very carefully to make sure that we know what status all of the collections are in, and as things are being done, to make sure that all is recorded and we can sort of see how things are progressing in terms of our different projects for collections. So this is our laptop here. It's probably one of the most important pieces of equipment in this room, just because it's what everybody uses to sort of make sure that we're all on the same page, to keep track of it. It is kind of like an archaeology library. It's quite similar, yes. So we talk about it being a repository versus just a collection, and I think that it's almost more like maybe an archaeology archive, I think, is maybe a slightly better analogy. But yes, it is great to be able to just sort of know where things are, have all of this material at our fingertips that we can use for research, for exhibits, and for all these different things. The other thing I want to talk about in here, you can see down our hallway, back out. So there's actually security access into this room. So this part of the building, the newer construction, has its own security access, and then this repository also requires special security access. So, excuse me again, but yes, we do take our collections care very seriously. I think the other thing I didn't mention yet, and that or at least I mentioned in passing, but we do try and control the humidity and the temperature in this part of the building in order to keep those collections more stable as well. So humidity is difficult, especially in a space this size. So we mostly are able to manage the temperature and use that as much as we can to keep the humidity stable. So our temperature is basically right around 20 degrees with like maybe a degree of variance. I actually just checked it today. It's been very stable since no one's been in. No one's really been opening the doors. Humidity is a little bit more in flux, but it usually is between about, I would say about 20 to 50 sort of in slow changes, which is pretty good for most of the kinds of materials that we're looking at for archaeological storage. And that's just looking at the most recent graphs from our monitors that I was checking today. This is, I would say, probably the most stable room also in the museum, even more so than the galleries in terms of its humidity and temperature, because again, it was custom designed to be that way. Lots of different stuff here. So you've got all these racks here. You can see in the background this little guy here. This is our flotation machine. If you were here for the talk I gave on archaeobotany, this is our dirt washer. This is how we separate fine archaeological materials like seeds and other small debris like really fine bones and so forth, and how we separate that from soil samples that are collected in the field. Basically gets put into this machine, which helps circulate air and water through the soil samples and brings all that fine material up to the top where it can get pushed off into a mesh and then collected and analyzed. It's actually probably one of our most popular pieces of equipment. We rent it on a daily basis to CRM groups, especially who have flotation that they need to do for their reports. So we often have people come in to use that for the day, and that's what these racks here are for. So we've got the buckets to collect the water and the sort of sludgy dirt in after it's been processed, and then these are just basically for drying those materials that have been processed. You can see some of these very fine mesh screens that are used to collect the dirt that's been washed, and then they just get set on these trays and dried. And unfortunately, since I can't bring you upstairs, I usually would continue my talk up there to talk a little bit more about the 3D scanning that we do, show you some of the workspaces that people are using for repackaging. We also have researchers who work in here. Currently, we have, well, I mean, not currently, unfortunately. With the shutdown, we don't have anybody in, but prior to that, we had a PhD student who's studying pottery design techniques from a particular cluster of indigenous sites. I cannot remember for the life of me what the time frame for those is, but she's got quite a lot of material that she's examining from the Arcona cluster sites, if that means anything to you. We have some of that material is actually in our Who Cares About the Past exhibit, so if you were here for that tour, you might have seen some of those really big, beautiful sherds of indigenous vessels. So she's been up there working and going through materials that we have in our collections here in order to study those and include them in her PhD research, which we're looking forward to her conclusions in the long term. No pressure, Amanda. So I hope you have found this all interesting. I do love to show this space off, to sort of talk about what all we're working on here, to go through some of the collections. And we had planned this fall to actually open the collections repository for tours during the Doors Open event in London. I think the plan is theoretically for that to happen currently, but we'll have to look at what exactly that does look like if we're able to do that in the fall. I would definitely encourage you to come and see this on your own. Even if you heard the talk, it is, like I said, it's kind of a different experience to see it in person. And if we don't do it this fall, we'll certainly have other opportunities in the future for people to come in and see sort of what we're doing, see this space, get an idea of the quantity of collections and how they're being treated here. So thanks again. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the feed. And again, I don't have my other setup here, so I can't drop the link for you. But if you have been enjoying these talks, if you have the ability to do so, then please do consider dropping us a donation. You can get to that through our page, so we're archaeologymuseum.ca. And if you go to support us, and then there's a donation page there, and you can just either write us a check if that's how you do, or you can also send us a donation through PayPal. We very deeply appreciate it, again, in these sort of crazy times that we're all living in. So we'll be back with you next week. I believe Neil has also volunteered to prepare another talk that we'll hopefully have for you either next week or the week after, talking again about some of the sites that he's familiar with, linked to some of the objects that are on our Google Arts and Culture page. So hopefully we'll have that for you, as I said, either maybe late next week or the week after. Other than that, you're going to be back with me again, and I'll find something new to talk about. I believe I talked in the past, I suggested maybe privies would be a pretty cool thing to talk about, so I might pull out some materials to talk about that. And thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could found this interesting, and I hope to see you guys again in future broadcasts. Have a great day.